In this episode, we're going to focus on a topic that sounds straightforward until you try to answer it precisely. Where is the data, and where does it go? Many privacy mistakes happen because organizations believe they know the answer, but they are actually describing an assumption, not reality. Operational accuracy means you can explain data location and cross-border flows in a way that matches how systems and people truly behave, including backups, support access, and third-party services. This matters because many privacy requirements depend on location and movement, especially when laws or policies restrict cross-border transfers or require specific safeguards. It also matters because you cannot manage retention, deletion, and access if you do not know where copies exist. So the goal today is to build a practical mental model of data location, understand how cross-border flows happen even when you did not intend them, and learn how a privacy manager can get a reliable picture without turning into a network engineer. By the end, you should be able to describe what it means to locate data operationally, not just contractually. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CIPM in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to start is to separate three related ideas: storage location, processing location, and access location. Storage location is where data is stored at rest, like in a database region, a file store, or an archive. Processing location is where data is actively used or transformed, like when an analytics job runs, a support tool searches records, or a system generates reports. Access location is where the person or system that can view or manipulate the data is located, which can matter even if the data itself never moves. In many privacy contexts, a cross-border flow can occur through any of these, because data can be made available across borders through remote access, replication, or centralized processing. Beginners often focus only on storage, because that is easier to picture, but access and processing are frequently where surprises occur. For example, data might be stored in one region, but support engineers in another region can access it for troubleshooting, and that access can be treated as a cross-border transfer depending on the rules you operate under. So operational accuracy starts with using the right categories, not just saying the data is in the cloud. Next, it helps to understand why organizations often get location wrong. They rely on vendor marketing language, like data residency, without asking what that promise actually covers. They assume the region chosen at setup time is the whole story, but they forget about backups, logging, analytics, and disaster recovery. They assume that because a vendor's headquarters is in one country, the data must be there, or the opposite, that a local vendor must keep data local. They also assume that internal teams use only approved tools, but in reality, people adopt new services quickly, especially for collaboration and analytics. Operational accuracy means you build your answer from observed system behavior, documented architecture, and contract commitments that match that behavior. If any of those disagree, you treat the disagreement as a risk to resolve, not as a detail to ignore. Privacy management is not satisfied by confidence. It is satisfied by evidence and clarity. To determine where data is located, you need to know what data we are talking about, because different datasets can have different locations within the same service. A customer account record might be stored in one database region, but the associated logs might be centralized elsewhere, and the support tickets that reference the account might be in a separate platform. Even within a single cloud provider, data can be stored in multiple services that have different regional behaviors. So the first operational step is defining the scope. What categories of personal data, which systems store them, and what copies are created during normal operations. Once you have scope, you can ask location questions that get specific. Where is primary storage hosted by default? Are replicas created automatically? And where? Are backups stored in the same region or a different one? Do logs or analytics stores receive personal data? And where are those hosted? Does the service use content delivery or caching that stores data closer to users? These questions turn location from a vague statement into a set of concrete facts. Cross-border flows often happen through replication, which is a reliability feature that can quietly become a privacy concern. Many systems replicate data across availability zones or regions to protect against failures. Sometimes the replication stays within a country, and sometimes it crosses borders depending on how regions are defined and how the service is configured. Another form of replication is backup export, where backups are stored in a separate account, separate storage service, or separate facility. Operational accuracy requires you to understand which replication is automatic and which is optional, because automatic replication can undermine your intended controls if you do not configure it properly. It also requires you to understand the difference between high availability and disaster recovery, because disaster recovery sometimes shifts processing to a different region when the primary region fails. In an emergency, services may prioritize continuity, and cross-border movement can occur as part of restoring operations. A privacy manager should ask how disaster recovery works and what it does to data location during failover, because those moments are exactly when controls can drift. Remote access is another major source of cross-border flow, and it is easy to miss because the data does not visibly move. If a support team in another country can access a production environment, that access can be treated as making the data available across borders. The same is true for vendors who provide follow-the-sun support, where support is distributed across time zones. Operational accuracy means you ask who can access data, from where, under what conditions, and with what logging and approvals. Is access restricted to certain locations or networks? Is access time-limited and approved for specific tickets? Is access logged in a way that can be reviewed? Can support export data or only view it within tools? Does the vendor use subcontractors for support, and where are those subcontractors located? These questions matter because remote access can be a larger risk than storage location, especially when access is privileged. If you cannot describe remote access pathways, you cannot confidently describe cross-border flows. Logging and monitoring systems create another set of hidden pathways because they often collect more than people expect. Application logs might include user identifiers, IP addresses, and sometimes content that includes personal data. Security logs might include authentication events tied to individuals. Monitoring tools might capture request metadata that can be linked back to a person. These logs are often centralized, retained for long periods, and accessible to engineers across regions. Operational accuracy requires you to know whether personal data is present in logs and where those logs are stored and processed. This is not about banning logs. Logs are essential for security and reliability. It is about ensuring logging is designed to minimize sensitive content, and that location and access controls for logs match the sensitivity of what they contain. A privacy program that maps only primary databases but ignores logs is missing a huge part of real data movement. Third parties and subprocessors can also create cross-border flows that your organization does not see directly. A vendor may host primary data in one region but use a subprocessor in another region for analytics, messaging delivery, fraud detection, or customer support tooling. A vendor may use global content delivery networks that cache data closer to users. A vendor may store support ticket data in a centralized system with global access. Operational accuracy means you do not stop at the top-level vendor. You ask for a list of subprocessors, what each subprocessor does, what data it receives, and where that data is processed and stored. You also ask how changes to subprocessors are handled, because a new subprocessor can change data location quickly. The contract should require transparency, but your operational practice must actually review the notices and assess the impact. Otherwise, you end up with a paper promise and an operational reality that drifts away from it. Another challenge is that location is not always a single point on a map. Many modern services use multi-region architectures by design, and even when data is pinned to a region, metadata may still travel. A user's content might be stored locally, but service telemetry or billing records might be processed elsewhere. Some services treat certain functions as global, like authentication or threat detection, which can involve cross-border processing of identifiers and event data. Operational accuracy means you are specific about which data elements are subject to which flows. If the system processes IP addresses globally for security, say that clearly and document it. If backups are stored in region but logs are processed globally, capture that. Precision is what makes a privacy assessment credible, because it avoids the false comfort of a simple statement like all data stays in one country. For most complex systems, the truth is more nuanced, and privacy management is about managing nuance responsibly. From a privacy management perspective, one of the most practical outputs of location and flow analysis is a data flow map that you can explain in plain language. You do not need to draw a technical diagram in the episode, but you should be able to narrate the flow. Data is collected in this region, stored here, processed here, accessed by these roles from these locations, shared with these subprocessors, logged here, backed up here, and deleted through this mechanism. When you can tell that story consistently, you can then match it to obligations like transfer safeguards, contractual commitments, retention policies, and rights request support. Operational accuracy also helps you answer hard questions during incidents, because you can quickly determine which regions might be affected and which parties might have access. A privacy manager who can connect location facts to response actions is providing real value to the organization. As we close, remember that determining data location and cross-border flows is not about guessing or repeating vendor slogans. It is about distinguishing storage, processing, and access locations, then validating each with a clear understanding of where copies exist and who can reach them. Cross-border flows appear through replication, backups, disaster recovery, remote support access, centralized logging, and subprocessors, often in ways that feel invisible until you ask the right questions. Operational accuracy comes from combining system behavior, architecture understanding, and contractual commitments that truly reflect that behavior, and treating mismatches as risks to resolve. When you can describe where data lives and how it moves with precision, you strengthen everything else in a privacy program. Vendor management, transfer compliance, retention, incident response, and accountability. Privacy management is ultimately about keeping promises to people, and you cannot keep promises about data use and protection if you do not know where the data really is.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.